Hi, welcome to More Christ. This is a channel dedicated to Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox alike. Today, I'm joined by Thomas of the magnificent YouTube channel Storytellers. As well as being one half of this brilliant channel, Thomas is an historian studying in the Netherlands. Storytellers is a channel set up by Thomas and his close friend Lars in Amsterdam a number of years ago to create complex but digestible video essays in film and writing. According to the About section on YouTube, they strive to extract meaning from story through symbolical and cultural film analysis. Storytellers has looked at some of our favorite films over the last few years and now has over 17 million views on YouTube. The channel is also 313,000 subscribers and counting. I think that's actually gone up since. So just to begin, if we may, Thomas, with what does it really mean to extract meaning from story through symbolical and cultural film analysis? Can you tell us a bit about
that? Well, first off, thanks for having me on, Mark. I know we've been talking for quite some time, and I think I'm in good company being on your channel. So I'm really glad that you'll have me on. Yeah, I was actually I was laughing when I saw that question because I think that's on our About page, and I don't think anyone ever looks on that page. And I haven't looked on a page for like a long time, so I think that's something we put down maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But I think it still holds true. I think I would say it a little bit differently now, but I think the essence of the channel, and I've been thinking about this over the years as well, but what is the channel, and it has developed over the years. I think Storytellers, for me, how we started was that the fundamental question for both of us, and especially for me, was I was interested in stories since basically forever. And the question that interested me was, why do some stories resonate with audiences over time? You have, the Lord of the Rings and all the classic stories and the myths that we still enjoy. And then there's stories or movies that, you watch a week ago and you don't remember anymore. So what I believed was that good stories, at least, they tell us something about the human experience. It isn't merely, a type of escapism. Obviously, it can be that, going to the movies. But I think storytelling in general, good storytelling, tells us something about the human experience, what it means to be human, and also how the world lays itself out, how we can make sense of the world and of life through our people. They can help us grow and mature as people. Obviously, stories are, we tell stories to kids to make them grow as people and to make them understand the world in a sort of an easy way for them to understand. But we also still use it for adults. We engage with this all the time, and part of that is a type of escapism. It depends how you interact with it. But I think if you do it consciously and you focus and you pay attention to good stories and what they mean, I think it can definitely help you grow. And I think a big part of the channel is to pick our favorite movies and then try to tell you why we think they're good, and also try to enhance my own understanding and appreciation of a film, and perhaps take something away from that. And I think beyond that sort of personal, maybe psychological level, I think movies and stories in general tell us something about the sign of the times, or the cultural moment, if you will. They both reflect and inform our culture at the same time. So looking even at bad movies, and there's a lot of bad movies and TV shows. No, you know that we talk about this all the time. Especially Netflix. It's 90% what they make is trash, and you have to watch some of the things, especially the things that do get a certain audience or do become popular, but sometimes still very bad, or pretty bad, or mediocre, whatever. You still have to see, like, why is this at this point getting an audience, or why is it getting a bad reaction, for instance? And then I think it can definitely tell you something about where we are as a society or as Western civilization at this point in time.
Most interesting. Let's just take it to your own origin story, as it were. Can you tell us a bit about your background and some of the key events that brought you from a small town in the Netherlands to Amsterdam and onwards to become a YouTube star?
Well, we like to say, I'm from Maastricht, and we like to say this is the capital of the Netherlands. Everything is just the surrounding area. So a small town, I don't know about that, but no, it is a small town. How I grew up, basically from a young age, my two main interests were film and history, and both of those, my dad played a big role in that to sort of kickstart my imagination in those two subjects. So when I was, I think, 4 years old, Star Wars: The Phantom Menace came out, in theaters. It's a pretty terrible movie, but I was 4 years old and I'd never been to a movie theater before. So my dad decided to take me there. It's like, oh, maybe you want to go to the movie theater. I was like, okay, let's go. And I was just, all the laser, the lightsabers and all the special effects, and I was just completely blown away. And I was talking in the theater because I didn't know yet the decorum of you can't talk in a theater. And I was like, whoa, what's happening? And from that point on, I remember just being completely entranced with movies, but also with Star Wars, of course, but movies in general, and the magic of movie storytelling. And yeah, from that point on, I was just completely hooked, and it continued on until now. And as for history, I think when I was about 9 or 10 years old, a couple of years later, my parents were deciding to go on a vacation to Normandy, and my dad showed me some pictures and things from the Normandy beaches and from World War II. And I had heard of the Second World War, but I couldn't, I was very young and I couldn't quite grasp what exactly that meant. But seeing the pictures and the documentaries even, and the old war movie, not Saving Private Ryan, but the older one, The Longest Day. He showed me that movie, and I was the same as Star Wars. I was just like, whoa, but this happened in real life, and going to the beaches at that point was exactly the same sort of visceral experience as going to the movies for the first time, where I felt like really, my imagination standing in the bunkers, and I was trying to picture what it would have looked like and all this sort of stuff. And, that really energized me to become, to delve into history, not just the Second World War. I sort of started with that, but then I went to the Middle Ages and all over the place. But the Second World War was always the main thing that I was interested in. And so those two things really, crystallized over time, those two interests. And so in high school, I very quickly already knew that I was not going to do anything with physics or anything with math. I was terrible at both of those things. I was like, well, luckily in the Netherlands, you get to pick in high school which topics you want to do, which like package you want to do. There's like a Mickey Mouse package, which is like, I want to have that one because it has the languages, it has history, and I don't have to do any of the difficult things. I don't want to be a doctor. Everyone wants to be a surgeon in high school, or like whatever, a lawyer. You can still be a lawyer with what I do, but I was like, I can do the easiest thing because I wanted to do film at that point. So it's like, I'm not going to do something that I don't need for university. So I did that. I went to study media and culture in Amsterdam. So I traveled all across the country. Media and culture, you had 3 specializations. It was film, TV, and digital media. I was interested in film, so I picked the film track. Quickly realized, however, that a lot of the people there were not really the type of people that I thought that I would, even though we had similar interests, they weren't really the type of people that I would. They're very sort of artsy, hipster type people. I'm not very, I don't know. I'm pretty like more like a creative as well, of course. But we weren't quite vibing. They were nice people, but I quickly noticed that this is maybe not my crowd. Whereas I thought that this would be a sort of heaven of similar minded people. But I only found 2 or 3 people who I really got along with, and all of them had a similar experience with other people. And those two, one of them was Lars, and so all of them are still like some of my best friends. So going through that, I finished media and culture. I got kind of disenchanted with the whole university thing. We had to learn a lot about postmodernism and theory, and I wanted to do more practical stuff with film. And I wanted, I was inspired by film. I wanted to learn what makes stories tick and not like deconstruct the whole thing. I like the analysis part of it, of course, but I wasn't interested in Marxism. I wasn't interested in all these types of things, even though at the age of 18, 19, part of that was just because I couldn't understand it fully. It was all in English. I'm Dutch. It's very difficult coming out of high school. So I think part of that sort of saved me from going down that rabbit hole for a while. So yeah, long story short, after I finished up my studies, Lars and I decided that, well, there's a lot of things that are pretty useless for us. I didn't want to do anything with the theory. I didn't want to do a master's in film. But I had done a minor in American history because I almost quit and did a history bachelor's, but I decided to just finish the thing first. So Lars found the channel, The Nerd Writer, on YouTube, which was one of the first video essay channels on YouTube, and he did film analysis, and he thought that, hey, we were taught the same things in school, so we can probably convert what we wrote in school into these video essays, convert what we did in school into these video essays for YouTube. So I was like, okay, I'm on board. We want to learn how to edit so we could do more practical stuff. And so that sort of got the ball rolling on that. And we very quickly actually gained at least some audience, because this was a very new niche. Like almost no one was doing this. Now everyone is doing video essays, but I think that's one of the, because I don't even think that we're like even close to being the best at editing or anything like that, or even presentation. But because we started early, I think that really helped us to sort of get started and get going. So we were lucky in our timing. Yeah, I don't know if you want to go, you might want to ask, I think you have a follow-up question where we can go into the later parts of my development.
Sure. So I know now you're no longer in Amsterdam. Just for anybody interested, what are you up to today?
So I did YouTube for a couple of years. I'm still doing it. I did it 2 years for about full time. And then I decided that I wanted to return actually to university. So now I'm doing a master's in military history. I decided I've done the film stuff. I think I've gotten out of it what I wanted to. Initially, I thought I wanted to go to be a director and work in Hollywood and be famous and all this sort of stuff in high school. I really was, I really had looking back at it, I really had a type of hero's vision of what my life would look like. Now it just seems kind of silly. But I was, as I said, I was already pretty quickly disenchanted with that. And I did an internship as well at a TV production company. And I didn't like the people working there, and it was just not at all my vibe. It was very, I don't know. This is a completely different world that I really quickly noticed that this is not something I should do. I still wanted to do writing or be more of an independent type thing, but I thought this is not a world that I want to get into, and especially not Hollywood. So I decided I wanted to do history as a sort of backup for my film endeavors, and because it was something that I felt I hadn't properly explored academically speaking, and it was something that I saw online, a master's program that I really wanted to do. I didn't want to go back to school if I didn't have the right motivation for it, and I just to do a master's, I wanted to do a master's if I could find one that I really wanted to do. So I found this one. I'm almost done with it now. I'm finishing up my master thesis, and as it's been just the opposite experience of media and culture. I really loved it, and I think I'll finish with a good result, and I might go on to actually pursue a PhD or continue to work in this field instead, more the academic side of things.
Excellent. And just back to the channel, the Storytellers channel, another thing that's kind of interesting now in light of what's happening with big tech. What are some of the more frustrating constraints of YouTube, and from your perspective as somebody with a big channel, and how might they be improved?
Yeah, good question. It has sort of developed over time. I think especially for us video essay creators who work with film and copyrighted material, copyright is just it's just a terrible thing on YouTube, especially in those first couple of years, especially when you're a small channel. Mm-hmm. Because we're pretty established now that we can get away with a lot of stuff. Like if there's a problem, YouTube will probably solve it for us eventually. It might take a while, but we don't really run into too many issues anymore. The problem is that for a lot of smaller creators, if you're using copyrighted material such as movies, even if you edit it in a correct way, you will likely get hit by a copyright strike by, probably it's going to be a bot. It can be an actual person as well doing it, we'll say. The only thing you can do is the video will likely get taken down or will be blocked or something, or you won't get any money for it. So it's very difficult to predict when you'll be getting money, for how long you'll be getting money for your product. They can just take it away at any time they want, and they don't need to have any proof or anything like that. Usually it doesn't even say why they blocked it. It just says it's copyrighted material, even though you're completely within fair use. So the entire system, in short, really is skewed towards the production companies and such. So it's can be very frustrating, especially, I've done a video on Batman, and I've been doing this for like 4 years, so I know the rules, and I know not to use too many long clips, even though it's completely within fair use. They don't want to have clips that are longer than 10 seconds usually, and so I always stay within that. But some of these companies, they change their bots sometimes, and so now all of a sudden it was like 6 seconds. So I had to completely recut the video 9 times over, because the bot kept picking a different piece of the video and targeting it for copyright strike. So it doesn't say like, oh, this and this part, these are all wrong, you need to change it. It just picks one thing, because one thing is enough to take the video down. And so you have to keep doing it until you're through all of them. If you ever you don't know if you'll get through all of it. And so the only thing you can do is you can appeal the copyright strike, and you get 3 chances at it. But if they keep saying no, at the third, if you do too many times, then YouTube can give a strike on your channel and say like, oh, now you can, you can't upload, you can only upload videos that are 10 minutes long, or you can't upload any videos any longer, you can't monetize, like they'll give you a penalty for it. So it's a very skewed system that really does not work well for especially smaller creators. The problem now is, though, that the censoring is really ramping up. And so we've seen it recently with the PewDiePie situation. I don't know if I told you about that. PewDiePie was, the biggest creator on YouTube, was recently shadow banned on accident by YouTube. I think it is an accident. It was probably just a bot. And we don't really know why, but it's likely because he mentioned something that wasn't, in line with the Chinese agenda. He said something, he was critical of China. And that's probably why the bot like caught it in the in the subtitles, in the transcript, and that's probably why he got shadow banned, because he doesn't say anything else controversial. So there's really no reason why that would have happened. And even if it's a bug and it has nothing to do with it, it is still very worrying, because it means that they have a certain feature to shadow ban channels, and PewDiePie, obviously everyone would notice, and he'll be fine. But this means that it's probably happening. No, not even probably. It's definitely happening to to smaller channels. So that's something you can get out of. Copyright, you can still sort of, it's mostly incompetency, in my opinion, and maybe some of the companies that just want to take your money, they're just greedy. But I think it's mostly now it's just plain censoring. And I think for us, we're not too political, so I think we'll be okay for now. But imagine if you have a political channel or anything remotely controversial. I don't know what it's going to look like. I hope it's going to get better, but the tendency has been for YouTube to get worse instead of better. So it's not a good development.
Ah, gosh.
Yeah.
Let's go back to something then more positive.
Yeah, we could do a whole podcast about just that. Being ranting.
So I want to ask you about influences next. Are there any persons who've been especially inspirational or influential for you in your life that you'd care to tell us about? So I know some of them from previous conversations, Jordan Peterson, Pageau, people like that.
Yeah, sure. I think certainly Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pageau have been probably at the core of my intellectual development over the past 4 or 5 years, maybe. Before that and now as well, I think more on the margins of that, there are certain filmmakers, historians, historical figures, but also someone like Bishop Barron, for instance, and more theological people. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pageau. I think when we started the channel, this was right after college in 2016. This was right, like a couple months maybe before Jordan Peterson became a sort of a known person on the internet with that infamous clip of him being berated by his students about the trans thing. And so you can probably see it if you watch my older videos. We knew we had a certain intuition on how to analyze films and how to talk about them, but it isn't like very focused yet. I don't think we had a particular grounding on how to go about analyzing films. We're usually, taking things from things that we wrote or using articles to help analyze a certain film, but it was sort of all over the place. Not that we didn't make any like good content before, but it was certainly a bit chaotic. And I think that reflected my education as well in postmodernism and critical theory, that I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my own life and what my worldview was. It was still sort of, not very clear. I think I had some intuitions, and when Jordan Peterson came around, a lot of things kind of clicked for me. I saw that he did, that lecture series about what's the Lion King or Pinocchio. I watched the whole thing and I was like, whoa, this makes complete sense. And from that point on, I started using his sort of Jungian scheme, archetypal scheme to interpret movies. And it was such it was such a breath of fresh air, because now I felt like I'm interpreting movies from, let's say, the bottom up, or like what's in the story itself, rather than using a sort of lens, like a Marxist lens, from out, and coming out of it with a more reductive interpretation of a certain film, right? So that really put me on a sort of Jungian path. I got very interested in archetypes and all of this sort of stuff, and Campbell and all of these, more marginal figures. After that, I watched that video, I think a year later, where Jordan interviewed or did a podcast episode with Jonathan about the Pepe the Frog. And I was like, whoa, this is on a whole other level. And I saw that Jonathan, I checked out his channel, he's really small at that point. But his interpretations of, I think, Guardians of the Galaxy and all of them just were something else altogether. And so I remember I emailed Jonathan, I was like, your interpretations are amazing, and your knowledge of symbolism, all of this is very good. And I think I asked him for some recommendations in terms of books, because I thought he had it from some books or something like that. So he emailed me back and he said he liked my content, and we started working together. We did a video on Pacific Rim. We talked on Skype before, and we kind of we clicked. And from that point on, I started working with Jonathan. I still do sometimes. And I think that was really the point that started me on the path towards Christianity as well, and more of a Christian symbolic worldview. And I'm still on that path. But I've come a long way since 4 or 5 years ago. Looking back, it's been a crazy ride. And it has. I've talked with you about this at length, but it has completely changed my worldview, and it is still changing my worldview. So I'm excited to see where I'm at in another 4 years. But I've been blessed with this channel and how things have turned out so far. And I think that's what I want to say about that.
Yeah, thank God. And so let's go back to history. And I know that you're a huge fan also of John Lukács. We talked about this. Yeah. Why does Lukács speak so profoundly to you, and what does he and the art of history have to offer us today, especially whenever so many people seem to be pretty historically illiterate, to be honest?
Right. Well, first off, I think Lucas is just a great writer. When you read his history, it energizes you. It is something that sparks wonder, and it's very. It has a certain, his personality is really embedded in his history. He's not afraid. A lot of the historians, they want to take a very sort of almost a scientific approach to it, where they sort of remove themselves. But you can't say I, or you can't, it's very much, it's not a participatory thing. It's very much removed from it, or German type of mentality of doing history. And it's very dry usually, and it's not very exciting. And I think that's also why a lot of kids in school don't think that history is very exciting, because it isn't. If you just read a bunch of dates and this happened and that happened, and you remove the uniquely human element from it, it's not very exciting. And I think Lucas really infuses his work with that, and especially of character. What I find so uniquely interesting about Lucas's work, beyond that sort of aesthetic, is that he rejects really that sort of dry German scientific approach, sort of modernist approach to history, often very determinist. And so often these works are more sort of social science as well, where they focus very much on economic factors and material factors, that as sort of these things that move people, and that they remove the human person from the center of the universe. And so they don't, like, what people think and their ideas and how they develop, and their uniquely, the individual character traits, they don't matter anymore. All that matters is like the economic and the quantities, which, obviously these things are important as well, but they give them such importance that you consume the most important thing, which is the human beings in history. And so I find that type of history very unappealing, in the same way that I find a lot of the critical theory in film analysis very unappealing. It doesn't really spark my imagination much. And so Lucas, the good thing that he does is that he places the human being back in the center of the universe. And so the human factor and human thinking and consciousness is at the most important factor in the development of history. And so that's always at the forefront. And that speaks it's a more holistic view of looking at history and writing history than is, you know, merely looking at economic factors or something like that. So yeah, and obviously his style is just, he's very snarky, and it sort of, it reads, the funny thing is he obviously passed away last year, I think, and he was like 94 or something, and his work really reads like something from a different era, and he speaks of himself as well as someone from a long lost era. And I kind of imagine speaking to him or reading his work kind of feels like what I imagine it was like to maybe go in like the late 19th century or the early 20th century to like a British tea house or something, and have an intellectual conversation with your professor or something. It has a certain quality to it in the writing that is very much missing in other works. So I try to you know, emulate that in what I do with my own work in history, and I think it is the pathway forward for future historians, contemporary historians, into especially making it more appealing for, you know, for young audience without going to, you know, trendy things and making it more appealing on a very superficial level. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you spoke about it there. You actually merged history and film analysis wonderfully in your video on Dunkirk, how Christopher Nolan captures the Dunkirk spirit. What did you hope to convey there, and would you like to do more videos like that?
Would I like to do more videos like? Of course, I would like to do more videos like. Unfortunately, there are not many movies that are like Dunkirk. I know some people really didn't like Dunkirk, and I think that's fair. I think it was a very different type of war movie. The thing is that with Christopher Nolan, he's such a visual storyteller. I think he's much better visually than he is in terms of dialogue in a lot of his movies. I think his brother helps him with the dialogue in his other work. He can be pretty witty, but carving out like very deep characters is not, I don't think is his best trait, but he's very strong visually. And so he would have been a great propagandist in like the Second World War, I imagine. The thing about Dunkirk is that it's been criticized for not having been like completely historically accurate. Obviously, it shows almost only British soldiers, and the beaches are pretty empty by and large, and so it doesn't really play out, let's say, the factual account of like this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. It's more, I feel like the reason why I think it's such a strong work is because it shows this phenomenal thing that happened, which is obviously hundreds of thousands of soldiers were evacuated from the beaches, but it's also, it was a moral or spiritual victory, even though it was a huge defeat in material terms. And it really shows you this crystallization of the Dunkirk spirit of a country that was fighting on against pretty much all odds. All of Western Europe had fallen, and it was honestly, you know, if you think about it, it was a miraculous thing that happened, both in material but also in spiritual terms. It's not at all a rational reaction to losing basically your biggest ally and losing all of your equipment, and you know, you coming back home and the country's like, okay, we're going to win this war. It's such a strange thing. I think that whole movie is about, you know, the going down into death, and you see the Stukas are attacking, and it's this confusion and the mist and the beach, and people are being swallowed up by the water. So it's all very primal imagery. And then there's this slow, you know, this sort of U-turn where the soldiers are being pulled out of the water, and there's this rising, this going back home, this imagery of going back to the cliffs of Dover. It's very contrasted with, you know, this murky waters in France, and the Germans are everywhere, and then you have that very clear image of the cliffs of Dover and this returning home to, let's say, a new order or something like that. So I think visually that really speaks. It's a very evocative film, and that's why I say it would have been a good propaganda movie back in the day, because it captures something that is true, I think, about that moment, about that event, and it's not necessarily factually true in the sense that it shows all the right units and all that sort of stuff, but I think it shows the more important thing, which is the meaning of that event in a way, without, you know, telling you what it means. Like, oh, now, you know, this is the Dunkirk spirit. Like it's very intuitive in the way that he symbolically shows you, takes you into the feeling of this event. that makes sense.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Thomas. And on Storytellers, then you share reflections that draw not just upon history, but upon art and literature, psychology, various disciplines. I'd love to speak about just some of these videos that you've created, if we may. So
Yeah.
let's look to one you did recently on Wall-E, the Pixar classic, subtitled now, Why Transhumanism Sucks. The title. Wall-E's a pretty fascinating movie, and like most Disney Pixar movies, was quite popular. However, there's not much dialogue in this one, and the profound themes may have been missed by many. What did you find so captivating about this film, and what key message or messages has it got for the viewer?
Right. Well, once again, I think it's the same with Dunkirk. Is also a movie with hardly any dialogue, but I think Pixar, in the same way that Nolan does, they have a way of showing or bringing to life very evocative symbolic imagery that sort of speak to the soul. And I think Wall-E is a really perfect example of that. I think the more recent work isn't as good, but certainly Wall-E back in 2008, I think it came out, is such a universal story, but it also spoke to themes that were current then and are even more current now. And combining those two elements, I think it makes for a very appealing movie. It really is. Having read C.S. Lewis, The Abolition of Man, it's really just the abolition of man made into a movie. I think I don't know for sure, but I feel like C.S. Lewis would have loved this movie, because I think it tackles the question again of what our place in the universe is. And it also implicitly, it tackles some of the excesses of modernism and postmodernism. And it offers, I think, a possible path back home. Yeah, about that title, I actually changed it. I think the reason why is because the video wasn't doing all that well on views. So I was like, I'm just gonna try something crazy. I did get a little more views after that, but so I've gotten some complaints actually that it's not completely accurate. It's like, well, transhumanism usually means that you're putting some sort of technology in your body. So okay, fair enough. But to me, I feel like symbolically speaking, the images are the same. Yeah. You have these characters that Wall-E goes to. If you haven't watched the movie, Wall-E goes to this robot and he goes to this spaceship that has sort of the last human survivors of Earth, and they're living in this high-tech spaceship, and all of them are super obese, and they live in these sort of pods, right? The type of bubbles of technology, which sort of satisfy their every need. They don't have to do anything. They're sort of controlled wherever they go, set paths, and so they're made into slaves of technology in a way, and in doing so, in subjecting themselves to this sort of to the will of the technology, they become literally less human, and you can see it physically, but also spiritually. And I think Lewis would say they're not humans at all anymore at that point. And so, what's so inspiring about Wall-E is, of course, that it returns again. Like what Lucas does, and also what Dunkirk in some way does, what Nolan tries to do. It returns to human, to his proper place, I guess, at the center of the universe. It basically says that we can't just lay around and wallow in our own in our urges and our emotions and have be like happy 100% of the time and just feel fulfilled and cozy and safe. We actually, we have to tend to our bodies, we have to tend to our minds, and we actually have to take care of the earth as well. That's one of the big messages, of course, the more ecological messages, I guess, of the film. And so it's also a return to a type of childlike wonder and a sort of appreciation of the cosmos. Wall-E is, he's a robot, but he's completely enamored by the entire universe and about all the little things and the knickknacks that we don't even pay attention to anymore, and so there's something very essential about that, about the sort of appreciation of small things in nature. And it's funny because the way I see this movie as well is that it's basically just about modern human beings having gone into this rebellious phase where we've gotten such power over nature and over our minds, and we feel like, we can do whatever we want. We don't need God anymore. We don't need all of these things, these archaic things, and we can forge our own destiny. And I think this movie is, it's about starting to realize that actually it's pretty dark and cold out in outer space, and especially when you made technology your master and you're basically just a slave to your own urges. A lot of weird things pop up and strange people come about, and it doesn't make much, things don't are no longer making sense, and so I think that's why this is such a evocative film, because it shows you the way back, whereas usually series TV shows like Black Mirror also show you the dangers of technology and where we're headed, but they usually stop there. It's more nihilistic in a way, and I think it's in the end, obviously it's good to raise awareness, but everyone kind of knows, like, technology can be bad, phone bad, but what is the way back? And Black Mirror doesn't have an answer to that, but Wall-E does, and I think it's especially important because it's a children's movie, technically speaking. So yeah.
Excellent. And what are maybe one or two of the things that adults and children alike can learn from movies like Wall-E, or these transcendent movies that do go beyond our kind of stupor and obsession with nihilism and so forth?
Well, yeah, I think it's the same thing, right? I think if you want to talk about what makes a good movie, or I guess what should you take away from certain movies, what should you not take away from certain movies, I think the distinctive marker of a good movie and a good children's movie as well is because that it provides, let's say, a more universal story and a more holistic worldview, where you explore excesses of either side, excesses of order, excesses of chaos, and it sort of lays out this world as it is, and shows you, it shows you the excesses of both sides, but also how to rightly order, I guess, your attention, and which things are important, which things are dangerous, and I think when you're talking about propaganda, it usually is very reductive, and it only shows you sort of one side of the story, and it's nowadays it's also very exaggerated, almost to the point where it becomes sort of parody of itself. It's very strange. It used to be more sneaky about it, but now I think it's sometimes it's so ridiculous that you can't even take it even as a kid, you can't take it seriously anymore. The funny thing is that I was tutoring when I was living in Spain. I tutored two young kids aged 9 and 13, I think, and they were very into Star Wars, and they just gotten into it. And so I asked them, I was wondering, because, I grew up with Star Wars with the prequels, but I love the originals, those Luke and all of that. That really spoke to me in a certain way. Obviously, I had a certain love for the first movie because that was the Phantom Menace, because that was the first movie I ever watched, but that was about it. I know the second movie kind of sucked. I even knew that then. And so those originals were all very good. And so I wondered if this new generation would love the new movies, the sequels, The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, and if they, would have the Rey figurines and all of that. And I'm sure I know some of the kids do. But I asked them, and they were like, no, we don't like the new movies. The originals, the 1970 movie is where it's at, even though, they're raised on new media, and they have all the beautiful CGI in the new movies. And, obviously the New Hope doesn't look that great in special effects anymore. So, but they are like, no, this is the best movie. Luke is our favorite character. And so, I think children are very intuitive in that sense. I think they can be manipulated, obviously, but I do think that if you do point them a little bit in the right path, they'll know. Like they know what interests them, unless you like continuously bombard them maybe with propaganda. Otherwise, I think you really need to. Kids know what a good story is. I feel like they can't explain it, but they sort of know. And so I think that's a good marker for what you should pay attention to as well. Let me just say one more thing. I think in propaganda as well nowadays, you can really tell in movies like Wall-E, although it's also changing there, there's a little bit of that in there as well, is that masculinity and femininity, as they're portrayed by masculine and feminine characters, are usually, they're supposed to be sort of in unison. They have they're both their good and their bad, or the excessive qualities to them. And usually in the new movies now, we're talking about the war against masculinity, where female characters have to always put down a sort of toxic male character, or some sort of very crude male figure, or an enemy. And the funny thing is that it's not even actually a war against masculinity per se. It's just a war against femininity, because femininity is taken out of the equation altogether. It's just that the masculine is supposed to be, the girl character, or the woman character, and there's still masculinity. It's just the woman. Femininity is not even there anymore. So so I think we need to be wary of those types of stories, especially for kids, and especially if you have a daughter. I think that the supreme lack of femininity, it can be very damaging to them.
Most interesting and depressing at the same time.
Yeah.
So many pills. Just
Hey, you think we're gonna have fun? I don't think so.
That actually brings us to the next one we want to look at is the analysis you did about the so-called real meaning of Baby Yoda and this renaissance within the Star Wars franchise. What's the real meaning of Baby Yoda, aka the child, and why did you think that this story needed to be told?
Sure. Yeah. I just wanted to say, if I'm ranting too much, you can sort of guide me back in. I look at, I go on tangents. So okay, Baby Yoda. Well, Baby Yoda, the video that I did, I noticed a couple of episodes into the story, I wasn't quite sure where we're going with it, because it's a very episodic type of show that's not, you don't really have that a lot anymore, where, back in the day in the 20th century, you would have shows that are just sort of one-off 20-minute episodes, and there's sort of maybe a larger story woven through, but it's very, very much on in the background. And I think this is sort of similar in that way, but there is a certain thread. And all of a sudden I started to notice that actually this story is almost an exact retelling of, symbolically a very similar retelling of the Saint Christopher story. So in that sense, you could see Yoda, I guess, as a sort of Christ child. I think that's a bit too crude, but certainly obviously that's a sort of allegory for it. I don't think it's direct necessarily, but certainly symbolically speaking, he is the Christ child. He's filled with, he's also just a young child, which is a type of a marker for a potential of new life, of truth, and especially of innocence, and also of holiness. Every episode when there's some sort of violence, you're like, oh, should we do this in front of the kid? It's always sort of, he's this sort of revered by everyone almost, even by the enemies in a sense. And so I think the popularity of the show really showcases, in a sense, a longing, especially the popularity of Baby Yoda as a character as well. He's very cute, of course, but I don't know if you saw the images of last Christmas. People were putting Baby Yoda up on Christmas trees, and they're putting him in little mangers and stuff. So obviously, the connection there was very clear to people. Some of it may have been even unconscious, or they were changing angels with Baby Yoda. And so I think, especially for secular people, the fact that they like this so much showcases, I think, a longing for these types of stories, and also, I guess, a longing for the Christian story in a sense, even though they don't really have access to that, or they don't want to. And so this story of Saint Christopher really is a story of the role of that the margin has to play, and I guess keeping out the worst monsters, and I guess flipping the world back on its feet. We've seen this recently with, Jonathan has talked about this with Kanye West and even Jordan Peterson, and all these sort of marginal, sort of semi-Christian figures who are now, even comedians as well, talk about like, the world is going like the world is flipped on its head, and what the hell's going on? And so you have these very unlikely people working together to all of a sudden and talking to each other and saying like, whoa, something happened, something went wrong, and we want to actually I guess save the spirit of the Father and flip the world back on its feet. And so I think that it's very funny that this is a Disney show, because you wouldn't really expect, because a lot of the stuff that Disney puts out is just kind of not so great nowadays. But this show so far has been very traditional in a sense, and has really kept to very good storytelling, especially for kids as well to watch. I think it's a wonderful show. So yeah, I think I said all about that.
And so you weren't brought up Christian, but
No.
You have now developed discernment for some of these distinct Christian themes. We mentioned Jonathan Pageau specifically and how he's influenced you. How has he helped you discern some of these themes and archetypal and specifically Christian themes? And how do we know that we're not just reading too much into movies or TV shows?
Yeah, good question. I think a lot of it, I've been thinking about this myself, like what was the moment that I sort of got it? I think in the beginning, a lot of my analysis was just, even after I met Jonathan, I think a lot of it was more intuitive. I was sort of going off on what he said, and I felt what was right and I think I've probably made some mistakes in the beginning as well, and I still do. I think, where do you discern whether you're reading too much into it? What I like to do when I analyze movies is I try to track the movement of the story and the movement of the characters from the beginning, especially from the first scene and the ending scene. Usually the first opening scene and the ending scene will tell you a lot about the meaning of the story in itself. And so you can see where's the character in the beginning, where is it at the end, and then you try to track motifs as well and themes, and you try and get a certain sense of the meaning of the story, also what the director is trying to say. And then going beyond that, you can look at does the symbolism, especially if it's good symbolism, it will scale in a sense. And I think we'll get to that when we talk about the Batman trilogy. So if there's something that happens to a character, does the same, for instance, if the Batman character with Bruce Wayne, things that happen to him in a personal level also sort of reflect what's happening him into his circle of people that he knows, and then what's happening in the city. And so all of these things are very coherent. And so if what you're seeing in a movie scales like that, and if it fits with the general movement of the narrative, usually I think you're on the right track. But I think also a lot of people, I still get comments sometimes, not a lot anymore, but I will get comments from people saying, you're reading too much into this film. This is not what the director intended to do. But it's not really what I'm setting out to do either. Like, if you want to do analysis saying, oh, this is what the director intended, then yeah, of course you need to discern what, but it's impossible to read someone's mind. So for me, it's like, it's not very important for me whether the director intended something or not. I think people do things unconsciously as well, or they only understand it on a certain level, what they've done. Mm-hmm. Right? An artist usually doesn't know exactly, he has a sort of intention, obviously, and what he sets out to achieve, but the stories that they write and they direct also reveal something of their own character. And I think with Nolan, that's very clear. I talked about this with Matt, and he told me, it's like, Nolan's stories, movies in the beginning, his first couple are pretty dark and nihilistic, and they sort of very end usually in a very bad way. And then all of a sudden, during The Prestige and all of his movies after that, they have a more uplifting ending with this Matt calls it this going home. It's always this narrative. Even in Dunkirk, it's this going home always, and going back to sort of center and family and love and all these things. And Matt is saying that, oh, it's probably because he became a family man. He became a father at that point, and so you can see his psychological change maybe in his movies as well. And so what the director consciously intended is half a story to me. So it's not that important, unless you want to unless you're claiming that this is what the director intended, then you need to have some sort of evidence for it. But it's not really what I'm setting out to do.
Mm. And it's this kind of symbolic world that Pageau talks about that lays itself out according to a certain pattern or something that Peterson has kind of tried to trace as it expresses itself through Darwinian terms and through evolutionary psychology or whatever. But then Pageau takes it to another stage and looks at it theologically. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I think so. I think I've been thinking about this as well, what the real differences are in their approach. Certainly, I mean, I don't know about now that Jordan has gone through hell and back. I imagine his thinking has changed as well. We'll have to see. I'm excited for that, but I think so. I mean, Jordan is very sort of bottom-up approach, right? Sort of approach to let's say these patterns and to archetypes, and he's very much more of a Jungian. And I still think that the Jungian archetypes can be very useful in discerning certain story tropes and helping you to analyze these films. But ultimately, I'd say I guess the theological worldview or map of meaning of Jonathan is more is all encompassing, right? It's more holistic than Jordan's is more lacking in that sense. I feel like I don't know if I can explain that in more detail than that at this point. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that yourself. Maybe you can.
That's good. I couldn't articulate it. I do have a sense for what's wrong, and especially after reading Nancy Pearcey, she goes through the kind of problems with the pragmatic school, which Jordan, has kind of allegiances with. She goes through Pierce and people that he constantly mentions from the pragmatists and the problems with that school, particularly from a Christian perspective. So she would be able to express it. If anyone wants to follow it up, I would recommend going to her work, but I couldn't really express it well, and I wouldn't want to do Jordan at the surface.
Right. No, I can't either. This is something that I would have to, I think, write down instead of talk about like that. I think Jonathan did do a video on his differences with Jordan and where they like. There's obviously a lot of commonalities, but there's some points, critical points, where they diverge. But obviously, I've taken up the Pageauian approach to storytelling analysis at this point. But I still use, sometimes I'll make videos that are more like Jungian, I guess, also with my audience in mind. But yeah.
So now he's got that. After his name, the Pageauian, he had the Newsweek column. They called him a religious scholar.
Yeah.
So let's just go back to what people like yourself and Jonathan can offer that that Christians, like priests, pastors, explicitly can't. What do you think about that? What can we achieve? More marginal figures that those more kind of establishment.
Good question. I think, obviously, people like myself and Jordan, especially, because he was not like a priest or a sort of obvious Christian, he speaks to a much broader audience in that sense of people who would otherwise have been like, oh, just from the get-go, he's Christian, I'm not going to listen to this. Or like you would have some sort of prejudice against it. And so it really is, he is a marginal figure in a way that he is a sort of gatekeeper. He'll open the door just a little bit, just enough for you to accept it, and you can you get like, oh, this is interesting, and this makes sense, and then you slowly might go a little bit further inwards, and then you see Jonathan somewhere in the middle, and there's Bishop Barron as well, and there's all these people, and C.S. Lewis is there as well, and it's a big party, and so all of a sudden, your imagination is open to a lot of these things, but you have to, if you're really, if you grew up in a secular family, for instance, or secular society, most of us, I think you need those people to at least open up your sensibilities a little bit to this worldview. But you can't go like from 0 to 100. You can't go from 0 to Jonathan right away, or to I don't know, one of the church fathers or something. Like, you won't understand it. You can read it, but you won't understand it. And so I think that's something that I had to learn as well, where I'm now you can sort of sense where you're at based on what you understand and what you're reading as well, and what is too far out for you at this point on your path. And so I think that's something that marginal figures like us can do. I hope. I hope that's what my channel can do for some people, even if it's just one or two. Because I'm very much on that path myself. So a lot of my channel is just me trying to figure things out. I'm not some sort of enlightened figure that knows everything. Like, usually when I do a video, that's something I was trying to figure out myself. And so, yeah, I think I want one more thing that I'd add to that is, especially with movies and stories, they speak to you, to the soul, in a way that is more intelligible, understandable, in a way that might not be the case for, let's say, a sermon or something like that. If it's a really good priest, then yeah, it can be like that as well. But it's more, again, it's something universal. Everyone likes stories, and so when you watch a good movie, and you can tell someone you need to be courageous or something like that, or you can't kill or something like that. But if it's something that you see played out in a story, that is a good story that draws you in, then that concept becomes way more palpable and way more, that's something that you take into yourself. Whereas, someone can tell you directly, oh, you have to do this, or you have to, these are the virtues that you have to follow, then it doesn't hit you the same way, So it's very more of a, it's not participatory, but it's about as close as participatory as you can get, I guess.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Thomas. So just back to the symbolism in the Dark Knight trilogy, you've already touched upon it brilliantly. I
Yep.
want to ask you, like Jordan Peterson, so you have a deep appreciation for these, what Jung called the archetypes and archetypal themes.
Yep.
How
Yep.
does Batman as an anti-hero invoke some of these archetypal themes, and why does he speak so particularly powerfully to us today?
Right. Well, I think, Batman as a hero really is the most relatable hero of all of the heroes almost in existence, all the Marvel heroes, because he isn't a superhero. He's just a guy. His superhero is that he has a lot of money, basically, but and what makes him so relatable is that he goes through this awful trauma, of course, and everyone faces difficulties and everyone faces traumas at some point in their lives, or maybe most of their lives even. And what's so inspiring about the Batman story is that it isn't that like it isn't a nihilistic story where it's like all this awful stuff happens to him and the city is going to crap and everyone is corrupt and it's just awful. But it's a story on how to deal with the trauma and how to transform it into something that is life-giving. And I think that obviously is a very it's Christian in that sense, and I think it's just something that is very inspiring for everyone. And so because he is so flawed, he's a sinful human being, and whereas you have Superman and all these characters which obviously can inspire people as well, but they're too perfect in a way. It's like, how do you attain that? It's like, at least Batman is something that, especially as a kid, you can sort of look up to, and but also acknowledges that human beings, yourself as well, you can do bad things, but you have to sort of try and take those demons and take those fears and everything and try to convert it into something that is good and that is worth doing. And so the funny thing about Batman as well is that, in terms of, if you want to talk about the villains, is that, and archetypes, is that Batman really has the best villains because they use these Jungian archetypes, especially the Joker, where if we're talking about the Nolan trilogy, it's basically all the villains speak to Batman in a way about his character. They're a shadow, if you want to use a Jungian principle. Basically, all his let's say his unconscious, suppressed things about his personality, or things that he's suppressing. And so the villain is someone that obviously is evil and that he should defeat, but it's also someone that he needs to learn from, because he can't defeat the villain if he doesn't learn from the villain. The villain is talking to him in a way, and let's say, if you want to use it more psychologically, he needs to integrate that villain in his own being without falling into the excesses of the villain. So for instance, in the Joker wants him to sort of become this sort of super tyrannical figure, and is trying to make him become that, and he needs to realize at that point that he's following this justice to, and he's becoming a sort of Nazi, or like an authoritarian, where he just wants to control everything, and he's controlling. There's too much order, right? And so the Joker's saying, you need to let go a little bit. Obviously the Joker wants to devolve everything in chaos, but there is a lesson in that, and it's saying that you can't control everything. It's going to be too much order, and otherwise I'm just going to get stronger. The chaos is going to get stronger. It's just the pendulum will swing in that sense. So obviously then the last movie is about him letting go of his hatred as well, and his hatred for himself, where he wants to commit suicide, basically, where he's like, I just want to self-sacrifice myself for the community. But it's also about him accepting himself again as a person, and going back into the garden with Rachel. We talk about that this movie is basically about the fall, and this going back, this long road back to going back to the garden, and this union with masculine and feminine.
Yep, brilliant. And actually, that brings us on to the next one I want to look at, Collateral, Taming the Ball of Masculinity. So that was,
Yep.
I think, the first video of yours that I ever watched, as far as I recall.
Okay.
So in an age where masculinity in particular is being decried as toxic, but as you say, it is more nuanced because they're targeting femininity as well. Why is a movie like Collateral so important?
I think Collateral in a lot of ways is very similar to the Batman stories in a way, in the sense that it also uses these archetypes, where Collateral obviously is a story about a cabbie who is, he's a decent guy, but he's played by Jamie Foxx, I think. But he is, you know, he has this dream of what he wants to do with his life. He wants to start a limousine business or something like that. But he's scared basically of doing anything. He's staying in his own bubble where he's sort of safe. And this antagonist figure comes along, played by Tom Cruise, brilliantly. He's one of his best roles, except for Tropic Thunder. Where, you know, he's obviously a super hyper masculine figure almost, but he does have, you know, he's basically the bull in the story. You see a mural in the beginning of this bull and the matador, I think, which is focused on for a little bit. And I think that's really the key to the whole movie. It's about this one character, the protagonist, has to learn to embrace some parts of masculinity, you know, without becoming a toxic male. Right. But he takes some things from it because we need those things, and they're going to pop up anyways if we're trying to repress it. If we're just saying like, oh, toxic masculinity bad, we just have to be these nice little boys and stuff, and then everything will be fine. You know, it's not, you know, the nice guys usually aren't so nice. You know, deep down they'll have some sort of very weird pathologies that they're repressing because they're trying to be nice guys. And I think it's actually more dangerous than, you know, guys actually trying to now, well, let's say integrate the bull of masculinity, what I talk about in that video. And so obviously in the end of the story, Max, I think, is the protagonist, learns some things from Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is too crazy. He's like, he's a nihilist, of course, and he's masculinity gone awry, basically. But the protagonist does learn some things from him, and he becomes, you know, a better man. He saves the girl in the end and all that stuff. And then he defeats the antagonist. But it is, you know, it is a story that makes sense. I think it's very important right now for us, and I think so for myself as well. I'm not some type of bodybuilder, expendables type guy, like, whoa, men. But I think that's, especially for guys like us who are more intellectual as well, I think that's important to get in touch with those more unfashionable sides of masculinity and trying to integrate that and actually use it for something good, you know, and not for, you know, not going all the other way where you're just basically too much macho, machismo, or the other way where you're just trying to repress it all together, but somewhere in the middle, you know.
Yeah, brilliant. And it also encouraged me to pick up and read Robert Elmer's book, which was quite helpful and has helped me in my own life. So I think both the movies and those portions help us out. Next one I want to look at is Rogue One, The Birth of Hope, which is something more positive from the Star Wars saga. So you show that Rogue One, The Birth of Hope, has escaped the descent into mediocrity or even degeneracy of some of the more recent Star Wars movies. How has it managed to do this?
Well, yeah, I'm asking myself the same question. I don't know exactly how it slipped through the cracks, but sometimes, you know, it's the same with the Mandalorian. They'll just push something out that is actually quite good. I don't think it's a perfect film or anything, but I certainly, you know, none of the Star Wars films are really perfect, maybe except for Empire Strikes Back. But I think the good thing about this movie is that it doesn't, whereas The Force Awakens, you know, also is in a sense a more traditional story, although it's not entirely true, but in a broad sense, superficial sense, it's basically just a carbon copy of A New Hope. And so it doesn't do anything original in that sense, but it also sets up for the crazy stuff which happens, the subversive stuff which happens in the following movie. It kind of sets it up already. It's not as noticeable yet, but it's there. And so The Last Jedi, of course, deconstructs the whole Star Wars story, and it's very meta in a way, and it doesn't really have anything to say, and it doesn't go anywhere, in my opinion. And I absolutely hate that movie. And then the last movie that came out, The Rise of Skywalker, was just a complete incoherent mess where that you're trying to, salvage whatever was made. The first two movies were Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. I can't even remember it. I watched it in cinemas, but I wouldn't be able to recount the plot. It was just a lot of fan service and weird things happening. Rogue One, on the other hand, of course, is the movie that takes place between Revenge of the Sith, the prequels, and A New Hope, which were the originals. And what I always thought before this movie came out was that besides that the prequels and the originals were made obviously in a very different time, that there was still a tonal disconnect between the Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. If you watch the whole saga in one go, and you go from Revenge of the Sith to A New Hope, it's pretty jarring, not just in the visuals and the aesthetic, and but also just the tone of the story. It's like the Revenge of the Sith is like the darkest moment of all of Star Wars, and then A New Hope obviously is one of the hopeful moments of Star Wars. It's a very different tone to it. And what this movie does so well is that it really sort of guides you through that change in tone, where, you know, you start the story off with this, where the character and the world is really at the lowest place. You know, the Republic has died, the Jedis are all dead, and so this old order is completely being destroyed and it's gone. And the rebellion itself is filled with these marginal, jaded people who are also very corrupt, and they do bad things as well. And so what's so beautiful at the story is that it sort of presents a type of spiritual revolution, if you want to say something, or like a moral victory, where slowly, because of the dead father of the protagonist, he presents this key where they might be able to defeat the Empire. It's the Death Star plans. And so he's this sort of, the spirit of the father holds the key to the renewal of the world. You know, it couldn't be clearer than that. It's type of Pinocchio in that sense. And so they have to go back to the knowledge of the father and save that and extract that and go down into, let's say, the belly of the beast and take it out. And there's the whole movie is basically a death and resurrection. It's the end of that cycle of death, where of the old Republic, and then there's the resurrection into a new hope with Luke Skywalker. So it sort of beautifully, symbolically brings you to that point, and you can feel that, because it brings you through those the change in tone, I guess I'd say. Yeah, I think that's something that those new movies don't do that at all. There's no, like, even though, you know, Rogue One is not a perfect movie at all, but certainly symbolically speaking, I think it is very, very on point. It couldn't have been done better, I don't think.
Excellent. So last one just to look at today, because I know there's so many more and they're all excellent and I would commend them to everyone, but I only want to keep you for so long. So
That's okay.
This one is Apocalypto, which you've looked at, the universality of the chase.
Yeah.
So this is a pretty fantastic, I think, but underappreciated movie by Mel Gibson. Both you and our mutual friend Matt of Logos Made Flesh have teased out certain profound themes in this movie, especially considering its relationship to his Passion of the Christ. What is the universality of the chase mentioned in the title, and why should it really resonate with audiences?
Well, I've told you this before in behind the scenes, but this is one of the earlier videos that I made. And so when you mentioned that you were going to ask me a question about this, I was like, oh God, I have to rewatch this whole video now. I did it. So I can't tell you how I came up with the title anymore, but I do know what it means in a sense. I think what I was trying to say was that obviously this movie is an action movie, which is the whole movie is basically a chase scene, or like the biggest part of it is basically just one giant chase scene with the Mayans in the jungle. And so I think it's been portrayed by critics as a racist action movie that sort of negatively portrays the Native Americans and sort of says, oh, when the Spanish came, everything got better and they're all savages and blah blah blah. And so I think this is obviously a reductive view of this movie, in which I explain in the video. The universality of the chase is really because this story is not just a random chase scene that is also racist. It's because it's a story about, you know, it's about family and about the collapse of civilization. And this is the collapse of the Aztec or Mayan civilization. I think they're going into, there's this decay of degeneracy and moral degeneracy, and they're sacrificing human beings, and there's ecological collapse. So and they're stealing, and there's this breakdown of meaning. But in the forest there's still these small pockets of people who are living, let's say, a moral Mayan life, and with family, and they still want to have kids and all this sort of stuff. That should speak as well to Christians in a way, and the struggle of the story, or the conflict of the story, is really between this big state that is collapsing, and the family unit, I suppose. And so this chase is this battle between those two things, which I think is universal. It's not just relatable for the West, but it's really something that we're all experiencing after, you know, modernism and postmodernism took over the world. What else should I say about that? I think, when I was sort of going through your questions, and then when I was going through my own catalog of videos that I've done, and I started noticing that there were similar themes to them, in the sense I've been talking about, and Matt sort of illuminated that for me, was that there's a sense of going home, and there's a lot of stories about being on the margin, and a sort of breakdown of meaning, and of characters going through some sort of death and resurrection, where they're going back towards the center, or they're trying to establish, let's say, a renewal of the world. Mm-hmm. And so this idea of going home, I think has been in my videos since the very beginning, at least since Apocalypto, and even though I didn't really know it back then, but it's very much been my own journey as well, I suppose, and it still is. And so I think that's really what I've been wanting to do with the channel as well, now that I look back, because I've been, people have asked me this question about what exactly is your channel, what are you trying to do? And so I've always had different answers to that, and I couldn't quite, like, I could say like what I'm doing, but not like why am I doing this. I like doing it, but it's like, that's not really, it wasn't very clear for me. But now I'm like, I hope what my videos have done so far, and hopefully continue to do, is that they do open the door for people who are in a way a bit lost perhaps in the modern world, and opening the door for eventual return home. And I think that's I hope that my channel can continue to do that, or does that for people.
Yeah, beautiful. I think so, and long may it continue. Just to close up then, Thomas, is there anything else that you're working on at the moment, or that you still feel a passion to get involved with in the future?
Yeah, well, so as I said, I've been working on my master thesis, finishing it up right now. It'll probably take a couple more 2 months maybe, and I'm doing internship as well. So I've been very preoccupied. That's where there haven't been as many videos. But I'm working on a video about Prestige, Nolan again, and about an interpretation connecting to René Girard's work. And after that, actually, based on our talk today as well, I think eventually I would want to do a video about my videos and this concept of going home, and this all-encompassing, I guess, pattern in my videos. And maybe that would be one of the final videos I would do for the channel. I don't know how long. We have no intention of quitting the channel at all. But Lars and I are both, over the years we've gone our separate paths. He has new interests, I have new interests, and so the identity of the channel isn't really as clear anymore as it used to be. We're not as aligned anymore, even though we it's not that bad. But there's Storytellers at this point is really sort of two channels in one, and there's some overlap, but it's more marginal than it was before, less marginal. And so I think what I want to do for the future is, he's working now, and I'm going to be, working as well. So we're going to have less time for it, but we still want to continue doing it. So we might have to think about, revamping the channel or rebranding it in some way, or maybe start my own channel as a separate thing, where I feel like, once I've closed up this chapter of this going home, I kind of know the meaning of my own channel now, and so perhaps it's time for a next chapter. But we'll see. I'm going to think about it and talk about it with Lars in the coming time, and we'll see what happens. But I'll definitely be active. I'll still be active on the Jonathan Pageau channel as well, so I won't be gone.
Amazing. We look forward to following you in your journey, Thomas, and God bless you.
Yeah, thank you.